Peace is not just the absence of conflict. Peace is the ability to transform the wounds of history before they become the prison of future generations. And today, in 2026, North Africa faces a difficult truth. The conflict between Algeria and Morocco does not belong to the past. It is not an old affair forgotten in the archives of the Cold War. It is still there. Deeper, more international, more strategic, and above all, more dangerous for the future of an entire region. For a long time, many believed that this rivalry would remain limited to two capitals, Algiers and Rabat, to a border closed since 1994, and to an old conflict over Western Sahara. But today, this rivalry goes far beyond the two countries. It touches the Mediterranean. It touches Europe. It touches energy. It touches the Sahel. It touches Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and even the broader question of African integration. Because when two great African nations spend their energy neutralizing each other, it is not only their future that they weaken. It is a part of the African destiny that becomes blocked. Algeria and Morocco are not small countries. They are two great historical, cultural, military, and economic poles of the continent. Two strong nations. Two proud peoples. Two rich civilizations. Two natural gateways between Africa, Europe, the Arab world, the Mediterranean, and the Atlantic. But instead of transforming this proximity into collective power, they have often transformed their neighborhood into permanent rivalry. And that is where the drama begins. Before going further, if this type of analysis helps you understand the hidden forces shaping Africa and the world, support the channel. Subscribe to CELFA, give a thumbs up, and help this message reach more people who still believe that knowledge, responsibility, and leadership can change the future. At first glance, Morocco and Algeria seem almost indistinguishable in their regional identity. They occupy the same geographical space in North Africa. They share Arab, Berber, Muslim, Mediterranean, and African influences. They were both marked by French colonization, even if their historical experiences were different. They have significant populations, strategic resources, powerful armies, and a real capacity to influence the continent. In the 1960s, after African independences, one might have imagined these two countries working together to create a strong, connected, industrial, solidary Maghreb, open to the Sahel and capable of weighing in the world. But that is not what happened. Instead of historical cooperation, Algeria and Morocco entered into a lasting rivalry. A rivalry fueled by borders inherited from colonization, by the ideological choices of the Cold War, by the question of Western Sahara, by diplomatic mistrust, by military competition, and by a silent struggle for regional influence. This conflict has not always expressed itself through open war. But it produced something almost as destructive: a Maghreb Cold War. A war of positions, symbols, diplomacy, closed borders, purchased weapons, built alliances, and lost opportunities. The origins of the rivalry between Morocco and Algeria date back to the colonial era. When France conquered Algeria in 1830, Morocco supported a resistance against this occupation. A decade later, France responded by crushing the Moroccan army, then annexing certain areas near the Algerian border. These territories, particularly around Béchar and Tindouf, became a sensitive point in the Moroccan political imagination. France, like many colonial powers, drew, moved, and administered borders without worrying about the profound consequences for the peoples who would live with those lines after independence. When mineral resources were discovered in some of these regions, the question became even more explosive. Morocco hoped that these territorial disputes would be settled after Algeria's independence. But when Algeria gained its independence in 1962, after a terrible and bloody war against France, its leaders were not ready to cede territories. The country had just paid for its independence with blood. It was emerging from a long, brutal, traumatic war. In this context, any territorial concession was perceived as an unacceptable weakness. A year later, in 1963, tensions erupted in what became the Sand War. The conflict was short, but its psychological consequences were profound. It installed a lasting mistrust in both camps. Morocco saw Algeria as a power that refused to recognize certain historical realities. Algeria saw Morocco as a potential threat to its territorial integrity. Even when the guns fell silent, suspicion remained. And sometimes, in international relations, it is not the longest wars that leave the deepest scars. It is the wars that confirm an already existing fear. Then, the Cold War added an extra layer. Morocco, an ancient monarchy, gradually moved closer to the United States and the Western camp. Algeria, marked by its anti-colonial struggle, built itself around a revolutionary, socialist, and third worldist imagination, closer to the Soviet Union and liberation movements. The two countries therefore did not see each other merely as two neighbors in disagreement. They saw each other as two opposing political models, two visions of power, two orientations of the world, two different readings of the African future. Then came the major turning point of 1975. Spain withdrew from Western Sahara, a vast desert territory south of Morocco, rich in resources and strategically open to the Atlantic. For Morocco, this territory was part of its historical integrity. For the Polisario Front, supported by Algeria, it was to become an independent state. For Algiers, the question of Western Sahara became both a matter of principle, a diplomatic lever, and a means of containing Moroccan regional power. For Rabat, it became an existential question of national sovereignty. That is where the rivalry between Algeria and Morocco became almost impossible to separate from Western Sahara. Morocco gradually consolidated its control over a large part of the territory. The Polisario, based notably in the Tindouf camps in Algeria, continued to claim independence. In 1991, a ceasefire was established under UN supervision. For a long time, it was spoken of as a frozen conflict. But a frozen conflict is never a settled conflict. It can remain silent for years, then become burning again when the international context changes. And indeed, the context has changed. Since 2020, the situation around Western Sahara is no longer as stable as before. The ceasefire has weakened. The Polisario announced its withdrawal from the ceasefire after tensions in the Guerguerat area. The United Nations now speaks of tensions and low-intensity hostilities. This does not mean total war. But it does mean that peace is fragile, that the line of tension remains active, and that the conflict can be reactivated by an incident, a provocation, a miscalculation, or a too brutal diplomatic change. And in 2025, a major diplomatic change took place. The United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution placing the Moroccan autonomy plan at the center of negotiations. For Morocco, this is an important diplomatic victory. For Algeria and the Polisario, it is a worrying signal, because it shows that the international balance of power is evolving. More and more countries now consider the autonomy plan under Moroccan sovereignty as the most realistic basis for a solution. The United States had already recognized Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara in 2020. Since then, other Western powers have moved their position closer to that of Morocco. And in 2025, this dynamic strengthened further. But be careful. This does not mean the conflict is resolved. On the contrary, a diplomatic victory for one camp can become a strategic humiliation for the other if it is not accompanied by a real political exit. Morocco may believe that time is on its side. Algeria may believe that the right to self-determination is being sacrificed. The Polisario may feel marginalized. And when an actor feels excluded from a process, it may be tempted to return to confrontation. That is why the current moment is both an opportunity and a danger. The opportunity is that a diplomatic window exists. The United Nations, the United States, and several international actors are trying to put the issue back on the table. The danger is that this dynamic is perceived not as a balanced solution, but as the consecration of a winner and the erasure of a loser. However, lasting peace cannot be built on humiliation. It must offer a political exit to all parties, even when the balance of power evolves. Meanwhile, the land border between Algeria and Morocco has remained closed since 1994. This closed border is one of the greatest symbols of Maghrebi failure. Two neighboring peoples, two complementary economies, two natural markets, two close cultural spaces, separated by a political line that prevents normal circulation, natural trade, families, entrepreneurs, ideas, academic and industrial cooperation. The cost of this closure is immense, even when it is not always visible in the statistics. And what was once presented as a threat has become a reality. After the rupture of diplomatic relations in 2021, Algeria closed its airspace to Moroccan aircraft. The gas pipeline passing through Morocco to Spain was stopped. Channels of dialogue remained weak. Mistrust became institutionalized. This means the problem is no longer just the past. The problem is now an infrastructure of separation. When borders are closed, when pipelines stop, when planes no longer pass, when embassies no longer speak, the rupture becomes a habit. And when a rupture becomes a habit, peace becomes harder to imagine. But the most worrying is the arms race. In 2025, Algeria became the largest military spender in Africa, with more than $25 billion devoted to its defense. Morocco, for its part, became the second largest military spender on the continent, with more than $6 billion. These figures are not just figures. They are schools not built. They are hospitals waiting. They are young people looking for work. They are roads, laboratories, factories, universities, research centers, and agricultural projects that could transform people's lives. Of course, every state has the right to defend its security. No serious country can live without an army. But when defense becomes a mutual obsession, when each military purchase by one justifies the military purchase by the other, then security itself becomes a prison. Algeria buys so as not to be overtaken by Morocco. Morocco strengthens its capacities so as not to be dominated by Algeria. And meanwhile, the Maghreb remains one of the least economically integrated regions in the world. That is where the conflict becomes deeply self-destructive. Because Algeria and Morocco have everything they need to become the engines of a great North African economic space. Algeria possesses major energy resources. Morocco possesses very developed port, industrial, and financial infrastructures. Both countries have a youth, an exceptional geographical position, an African, Mediterranean, and Arab history, and a capacity to connect the continent. Together, they could build a corridor between Europe, North Africa, the Sahel, and West Africa. But separated, they turn their potential into sterile competition. And here a new element changes the entire analysis. The conflict between Algeria and Morocco is no longer just a Maghrebi conflict. It is also becoming a conflict of influence in the Sahel. And the Sahel today is one of the most strategic spaces on the African continent. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are three landlocked countries. They have no direct access to the sea. To develop their trade, export their resources, import goods, industrialize their economies, and create new trade routes, they need reliable corridors. For a long time, these countries were strongly linked to economic and political routes passing through West Africa, notably through the region's ports. But after the coups d'état, the sanctions, the ruptures with France, the tensions with ECOWAS, and the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, these countries are looking for new options. It is in this context that Morocco proposed an Atlantic initiative aimed at offering landlocked Sahel countries access to Moroccan ports on the Atlantic. For Rabat, this is an extremely strategic idea. It transforms Morocco into a maritime gateway for the Sahel. It strengthens the country's role as a bridge between North Africa, West Africa, the Atlantic, and Europe. It also allows Morocco to speak not only as an actor in Western Sahara, but as an actor in African development. For Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, this initiative represents a possibility of diversification. It offers them another horizon, another route, another way out of landlockedness. For these states, access to the sea is not a detail. It is a question of economic sovereignty. A landlocked country always depends on the routes of others. If it has only one option, it is vulnerable. If it has several corridors, it breathes better. That is why the Moroccan initiative can appeal to these countries, even if they do not necessarily share all of Rabat's interests. But for Algeria, this evolution is sensitive. Algiers has long seen the Sahel as a natural strategic zone. Mali is its direct neighbor. The security of southern Algeria depends partly on what happens in northern Mali. For years, Algeria sought to play a role as mediator, security guarantor, and regional power in the Sahel. But relations with Bamako have severely deteriorated. In 2025, the crisis of the drone shot down near the border between Algeria and Mali caused a serious diplomatic rupture. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger recalled their ambassadors. Algiers and Bamako mutually closed their airspace. Mali even took the matter to international justice. This moment is crucial. It shows that Algeria is no longer automatically perceived as the Sahel's natural partner. Some of the new Sahelian authorities now view Algiers with mistrust. At the same time, they look towards Rabat for access to the Atlantic. This does not mean that Morocco controls the Sahel. That would be an exaggeration. But it does mean that the Sahel has become a new field of competition between Algiers and Rabat. And in this competition, economics, ports, roads, diplomacy, and political narratives count as much as weapons. The case of Mali is even more symbolic. In 2026, Bamako withdrew its recognition of the Sahrawi Republic and supported the Moroccan autonomy plan for Western Sahara. For Rabat, this is an important diplomatic victory because it comes from a strategic Sahelian country directly neighboring Algeria. For Algiers, it is a worrying signal. It shows that some African partners, even in its immediate security environment, can shift towards the Moroccan line. That is why the conflict is taking on a new dimension. It is no longer just about whether Western Sahara will be independent, autonomous, or integrated under Moroccan sovereignty. It is also about who will offer a vision for the future to the Sahel countries. Who will offer them roads? Who will offer them ports? Who will offer them corridors? Who will offer them useful diplomacy? Who will offer them a place in an Africa that trades more with itself? Because the real African scandal is there. North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa still trade far too little with each other. Economic routes often remain turned towards Europe, towards the outside, towards old export logics. Meanwhile, intra-African trade remains low. The Maghreb could become a historic bridge between Europe and Africa, between the Mediterranean and the Sahel, between the Atlantic and the Sahara. But for that, cooperation would be needed. Trust would be needed. A vision that transcends grievances would be needed. The rivalry between Algeria and Morocco therefore blocks far more than a border. It blocks a continental architecture. It blocks a Maghrebi dream. It weakens the African Union. It complicates Sahelian policies. It fragilizes trade routes. It encourages outside powers to play their own games. Because every time two brothers are divided, someone else comes to sell weapons, sign contracts, gain influence, and shape the future in their place. This is a lesson Africa must face. The continent's internal divisions never remain internal. They become opportunities for others. When Morocco and Algeria do not cooperate, the United States, France, Russia, China, Spain, the Gulf countries, and other actors each find space to advance their interests. This is not necessarily illegitimate. Each power defends its interests. But the real question is this: where is the African interest? Where is the African strategy? Where is the capacity of the continent's great nations to talk to each other before others speak in their place? Morocco is moving forward today with a clear strategy. It seeks to consolidate its diplomatic control over Western Sahara. It develops its Atlantic infrastructure. It strengthens its links with West Africa and the Sahel. It presents its autonomy plan for Western Sahara as a realistic solution. It positions itself as an actor of stability, investment, and connection. This strategy is producing results. Several African and Western countries are moving closer to the Moroccan position. Algeria, for its part, remains an unavoidable power. It possesses a strong army, major energy resources, territorial depth, an important diplomatic tradition, and a historical influence in liberation movements. But it now faces a difficult choice. Either it continues to defend the same position, hoping that the international balance of power changes, or it redefines its strategy to avoid progressive isolation. Because in diplomacy, it is not enough to be right in one's own narrative. One must also convince, build alliances, propose an exit, and remain capable of speaking to one's adversaries. The great mistake would be to turn this subject into propaganda. That is not CELFA's role. Morocco is not an angel. Algeria is not a demon. The Polisario is not a mere footnote. The Sahrawis are not voiceless geopolitical objects. Every actor has its history, its wounds, its arguments, its interests, and its contradictions. But one thing is clear. The status quo destroys value. It nourishes mistrust. It costs billions. It blocks integration. It prevents two close peoples from speaking normally to each other. And it prevents Africa from transforming a strategic region into an engine of development. If this analysis helps you see beyond propaganda and understand what division truly costs African nations, take a second to support this work. Give a thumbs up, subscribe to CELFA, and stay with us until the end, because the lesson here goes far beyond Morocco and Algeria. Today, we are therefore facing a turning point. On one side, Morocco is reaping diplomatic victories around Western Sahara. On the other, Algeria is seeing its regional environment become more complicated, particularly in the Sahel. Between the two, the United Nations are trying to relaunch a political process. And to the south, the Sahel states are looking for roads, ports, partners, and room for maneuver. Everything is linked. Western Sahara is no longer just a territorial question. It is a question of corridors, ports, security, energy, diplomacy, and African future. The danger is that each camp reads these developments as a reason to be tougher. Morocco might believe that time is entirely on its side and that it no longer needs to make concessions. Algeria might believe that it must resist more in order not to lose its rank. The Polisario might believe that the diplomatic struggle is closed and that only pressure can still count. The Sahel countries might use this rivalry to multiply their options, but also find themselves drawn into a game that surpasses them. And that is how conflicts become more complex. They start with a territorial question, then become struggles for influence, then networks of alliances, then psychological blocks that no one can dismantle anymore. But there is also another path. A difficult but necessary path. Algeria and Morocco could understand that their rivalry has reached its limits. They could recognize that neither of the two nations will disappear. That Algeria will remain a regional power. That Morocco will remain a regional power. That Western Sahara requires a lasting political solution. That the Sahrawis must have real dignity in any solution. That the Sahel needs development corridors, not just military bases and security discourses. That Africa cannot enter the future with mental borders inherited from the past. True political greatness is not about humiliating the other. It is about finding the formula that allows one's own people to move forward without condemning the neighbor to eternal resentment. True strategic victory is not just about winning a resolution. It is about building a peace that survives the resolution. True African power is not just about buying planes, tanks, drones, or missiles. It is about building schools, ports, industries, universities, railways, value chains, and peoples capable of believing in their future. The conflict between Algeria and Morocco reveals a hard truth. Nations can be right about certain wounds, but wrong in how they manage them. They can be proud of their history, yet prisoners of that same history. They can defend their sovereignty, but forget that sovereignty becomes weak when it destroys the opportunities of their own citizens. They can speak of national dignity while leaving their youth dreaming of a future elsewhere. And here the lesson becomes deeply African. The continent does not only need powerful countries. It needs countries capable of transforming their power into responsibility. Africa does not only need leaders who defend flags. It needs leaders who build bridges. Africa does not only need sovereignty speeches, it needs productive sovereignty. The kind that feeds, educates, heals, industrializes, connects, protects, and liberates future generations. Morocco and Algeria can continue to see each other as two adversaries condemned to block each other. Or they can begin to see each other as two pillars who, if they agreed to reduce mistrust, could transform the entire northwest of Africa. Imagine a region where borders gradually open, where Algerian energy, Moroccan industry, Atlantic ports, Sahelian corridors, West African markets, and the skills of youth become complementary. Imagine an axis connecting Algiers, Rabat, Nouakchott, Bamako, Niamey, Ouagadougou, Dakar, Abidjan, and Lagos. Imagine what that would mean for Africa. But to imagine that, one must first have the courage to acknowledge the current failure. A border closed since 1994 is a failure. A permanent arms race is a failure. A diplomacy that no longer speaks is a failure. A Maghreb unable to integrate is a failure. A Sahel forced to look for survival routes while neighboring powers quarrel is a failure. And a continent that lets its internal divisions become opportunities for outside powers must ask itself very serious questions. This does not mean we must forget history. No. Peoples who forget history repeat humiliations. But peoples who remain prisoners of history repeat conflicts. So we must do something more difficult. Remember without being a prisoner. Defend one's interests without destroying the common future. Seek justice without manufacturing eternal hatred. Protect one's sovereignty without refusing all cooperation. In 2026, the question is no longer simply about who is right between Algiers and Rabat. The question is how much longer Africa will accept that two of its great nations burn their energy in a rivalry that prevents the region from becoming what it could be. How much longer will young Moroccans, Algerians, Malians, Nigerians, Burkinabe, Mauritanians, and Sahrawis have to pay the price of political blockages? How much longer will billions go towards fear instead of towards the future? We must not be naive. Reconciliation will not happen in a day. It will not come from a nice phrase or an official photo. It will require courage. It will require concessions. It will require guarantees. It will require intelligent diplomacy. It will require an African vision greater than national pride. But every great transformation begins with a simple idea. What destroys our children cannot be called victory. And here CELFA leaves you with a hard truth. A nation that refuses to heal its old wounds always ends up making future generations pay for them. Borders can divide territories, but pride, mistrust, and propaganda divide minds. Morocco and Algeria are not condemned to remain prisoners of yesterday. But peace will never come from speeches alone. It will come from courage. It will come from leadership. It will come from the ability to choose roads, schools, hospitals, trade, youth, and dignity, rather than weapons, suspicion, and endless rivalry. Africa does not need more divided brothers. Africa needs nations capable of transforming pain into wisdom, history into responsibility, and power into service. That is the real lesson. Old wounds can destroy generations when leaders refuse to rise above them. But they can also become the foundation of a stronger future when peoples decide that enough is enough. If this video opened your eyes, support CELFA now. Subscribe to the channel. Give a thumbs up. Share this message with someone who still believes that Africa can rise through truth, courage, discipline, and unity. Here, we do not watch history as passive spectators. We transform it into lessons of leadership, growth, and awakening. Stay awake. Stay responsible. And never forget this. The future does not belong to those who repeat old wounds. It belongs to those who finally dare to heal them.